Hi everyone, it's Shelby Hartman, Double Blind's editor-in-chief, and I'm here today to talk to you about microdosing LSD. As many of you probably know, microdosing is a new hot trend that is growing in popularity for all kinds of reasons. It's grown in popularity among people who are looking to work more efficiently and looking for help with focusing, and it's also grown in popularity as an alternative mental health treatment for folks struggling with depression, insomnia, trauma, and a number of other conditions. The most important thing to know about microdosing is that there really isn't any research investigating its long-term efficacy or safety. That being said, it does appear from a number of anecdotal reports that it's not very risky. There are two sort of prominent psychedelic thought leaders, researchers, who I'm sure you've all heard of, who have developed microdosing protocols. The first is Dr. James Fadiman. He has a microdosing protocol on his website that we highly recommend you check out. And the second is famed mycologist Paul Stamets. We're very lucky to have hosted both of them for webinars at Double Blind. Jim Fadiman created a protocol that recommends that folks microdose once every 3 days. So you microdose, then you take the next day off, then you take the day after that off, and then you microdose again. Paul Stamets, on the other hand, developed a protocol that recommends microdosing 5 days in a row, taking 2 days off, microdosing 5 days in a row again. Again, there hasn't been much research looking at microdosing at all, let alone comparing the difference between Stamets and Fadiman's protocols, although they are dear friends and have talked about it and hypothesized that there probably isn't much of a difference. The most important thing when you're microdosing is to do it consistently and to take notes and pay attention to how you feel, because the whole point of microdosing is that it's subperceptual, meaning that, you know, Jim Fadiman has joked that if you're seeing, you're seeing colors and things are distorting or anything is happening to you that's trippy, you are not microdosing, you are tripping. A microdose, generally speaking, is considered to be 1/10 to 1/20th of a normal dose. So in the case of microdosing LSD, an average LSD tab is between 50 and 150 micrograms. A safe bet is to assume that your tab is 100 micrograms if the person that you're getting the acid from doesn't know, although they really should, and you should make a point of asking them. So that means that an average microdose is going to be around 5 to 10 micrograms, or maybe a little bit more. The reason it's recommended both by Fadiman and Stamets that you microdose for a certain number of days on and then a certain number of days off is because whether you're microdosing on LSD, Shrooms, 1P LSD, or any other psychedelic, you will build up a tolerance if you do it over time. Additionally, when you microdose, just like when you trip, you are going to continue to feel the effects of it at least a day afterwards. And so in the case of Fadiman's protocol, where you're microdosing for 1 day and then you're taking the next 2 days off, the day after you microdose, you should continue to feel the effects of the microdose. And then by day 3, you're probably going to feel like the effects are a little bit dulled, and then you're going to go back to microdosing again. Typically, Fadiman and Stamets both recommend starting by microdosing consistently for a month to 6 weeks and really paying attention to how you feel, because the shift may be very subtle. And also, just like tripping isn't for everyone, microdosing isn't for everybody. I've microdosed on LSD and mushrooms a lot, and I have to say that it's so hard to explain what it's like, and it's different for everyone. But for me, I just feel like my mood has been slightly shifted or slightly elevated. Ayelet Waldman wrote a New York Times bestselling book about microdosing called A Really Good Day. And that's kind of what it's like. Like, you get up in the morning, if it works for you, and you just feel like you're on the right side of the bed and everything's a little easier and your interactions with people are a little easier, and maybe you find yourself making healthier choices. Jim Fadiman has interviewed and surveyed I think more than 1,500 people at this point about their personal experiences microdosing. And an example he often gives is you might typically, reach for that cup of coffee in the morning or reach for that glass of wine at the end of the day. But when you're microdosing, instead, for whatever reason, you might wake up and say, maybe today I'll have some chamomile tea instead, because I think that that's what my digestive system wants. Or at the end of the day, when you're winding down, you might reach for that glass of wine and say, maybe I'll have a club soda instead, or maybe I'll smoke a joint, or maybe I'll just make that choice that is better for me, for my mind, my spirit, and my body. And it feels easier to do that. It feels easier to break out of those patterns that we find ourselves repeating again and again and again, even when we make promises to ourselves that we're going to be better next time, we're going to be different next time. In addition to the most common reasons people microdose, which I already mentioned, are a desire for increased focus, a desire for increased creativity, help with depression and or insomnia. There have been all kinds of crazy stories about things that microdosing can help with. A lot of women have reported that microdosing helps with irregularity around their menstruation. If you have an irregular period, microdosing might help get you on a normal cycle. There have even been reports of microdosing helping people with Lyme disease, which is just crazy. There were a couple reports that came in to Fadiman's microdosing database about that. It's just, it's really kind of mind-boggling how such a small amount of a substance can help with so many different kinds of things. But if you are dealing with some kind of ailment and you feel like there's no solution for it, it might be worth considering microdosing, and it might be worth poking around on the internet, on Reddit, or again in Fadiman's database and seeing if there are any stories that indicate that microdosing might be helpful for you, not just psychologically, but physiologically as well. Another thing I'd like to add is that a lot of people want to know the difference between microdosing LSD and microdosing mushrooms. And it's impossible to say because everyone has a completely different experience and there's just no research into this stuff. Anecdotally, some people say that microdosing LSD is better for concentration. So if you have a really hard time concentrating when you're studying or working or whatever, that might help. And other people say microdosing psilocybin is better for sort of creativity and mood enhancement. And other people say psilocybin is really great for mood enhancement. But there's a lot of overlap between the two. And if you ask Jim Fadiman what's the difference, he'll say from his anecdotal research that he hasn't found one. That both microdosing LSD and microdosing mushrooms pretty much do the same things for people. I can tell you it's been my experience personally that they feel very different. When I'm microdosing LSD, I feel like, I don't want to say this, I almost don't want to say this because everyone's experience is so different and I don't want to deter anyone from trying something that might really help them. But my experience has been that microdosing LSD almost makes me feel like I'm on Adderall or something. Like I really get hyper focused on my work or my reading or my music or whatever's right in front of me to the point that I kind of have blinders on. Whereas psilocybin for me, microdosing it has been a lot more spacious, and it does give me that sense of groundedness and mood enhancement that I'm looking for, but it also I find that I am just more generous with myself and my time. It shifts my mood without sort of putting me into this like hyper-focused state, which is almost, at times felt a little bit uncomfortable. But again, I think that the most important thing, assuming that there are no risks for you to do this, which the risks, seem very low for anyone who's a quote unquote healthy normal, is you should just try it yourself. If you have access to LSD and mushrooms, try LSD for 30 days and try mushrooms for 30 days and see which one you like more. One thing that I would be remiss not to acknowledge is that there is a really big debate right now happening within the psychedelic community about the difference between microdosing and macrodosing, and whether the microdosing trend is sort of just a cop-out I guess would be my way of putting it, for people who don't want to fully trip and who are afraid to fully surrender to a profound and potentially uncomfortable and scary psychedelic experience. Madison, my co-founder, and I recently wrote a piece about this for Rolling Stone called "The Case for Macrodosing." And I'll just say that at Double Blind, the thing that we care about most is alleviating suffering and helping people alleviate their suffering. And so if someone, can do that by microdosing, then we're supportive. And if someone can do that by macrodosing, we're supportive too. But it is worth noting that, obviously there is a lot of research looking at the therapeutic potential of taking larger doses. And they have found at institutions like Johns Hopkins and NYU and Imperial College of London and others that taking a large dose even 2 or 3 times has the potential to heal you in a very fundamental way from PTSD, from depression, from a lot of really debilitating mental health conditions. Whereas with microdosing, it appears as though, although we don't know for sure, that it's really more addressing symptoms rather than a fundamental underlying issue. And so if you want to microdose for depression or something like that, you're likely going to have to do it consistently over a long period of time to feel the effects. And we're unsure of whether if you stop at some point, your condition is just going to come back. So some people in the psychedelic community advocate for a protocol which combines macrodosing and microdosing together. They say that microdosing following a profound psychedelic experience can help you sort of keep the medicine alive, keep the revelations alive, integrate whatever sort of happened for you or came forward for you during your trip, and that's something that you might consider exploring too. In terms of negative things that can happen and risks, again, disclaimer, there's limited data out there, but from the surveys on Fadiman's website, the only 2 things that he's really kind of flagged are microdosing psychedelics can sometimes make anxiety worse. So he does not actually recommend microdosing for people who are suffering from severe anxiety. That's not something that you'll likely read online. Like if you just Google microdosing and you read a bunch of articles that are out there about that, they will say like, oh, microdosing is great for depression, trauma, and anxiety. So I'm just telling you, this is the information that he's reaped after interviewing more than 1,000 people about their experiences. And then additionally, in terms of contraindications with other medications, I think he found one case of a negative interaction between lithium and microdosing. So he doesn't recommend if you have bipolar or something and you're on lithium that you microdose. But he has a more comprehensive FAQ guide on his website where you can go ahead and read the most frequently asked questions about risks and contraindications and stuff like that. So just be mindful and be careful as always. So there's a lot of different ways that you can actually go about preparing your microdose of LSD. One way to do it is you can literally just cut up the tab into little pieces. Cut off a corner of it and put it on your tongue as though you're going to trip, but we would not recommend doing that because LSD can be unevenly dispersed across the paper, and also it can be hard to cut a square into 10 pieces. So my favorite way to do it and how we recommend that you do it is by creating an LSD microdosing tincture. It's super easy. It really doesn't take that long at all. And I highly recommend doing this instead of doing it some other way, because one of the most important things with microdosing, as discussed before, is having a consistent dose, paying attention to how that dose makes you feel so that you can increase your dose or decrease your dose or decide you want to try microdosing psilocybin instead, or maybe you just come to the conclusion that, hey, microdosing isn't for me. Either way, we are always available to answer your questions, and you can check out doubleblindmag.com for more information.